Okay. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, esteemed... who put esteemed colleagues in? Esteemed colleagues, yeah. So, good morning and welcome to one of the most anticipated sessions of World Water Week, the Young Professionals Debate. My name's Dr. Mark Fletcher. I'm the Global Water Leader of Arup. I'm also a Board Director at SIWI in the newly constituted board. And I'm honoured to be your host for this dynamic and thought-provoking event. I'm not building it up too much. It's a privilege to stand before such a passionate and diverse audience, united by a shared commitment to solving one of the most urgent challenges of our time, climate change. The first one of these I did about 10 years ago, and it was standing room only, and it's always been a really exciting event for us. So this year's theme, Water for Climate Action, it couldn't be more timely. Around the world, water is both a casualty and a catalyst in the climate crisis. From rising sea levels, intensifying droughts, to floods and shifting ecosystems, water's where climate change hits hardest and where solutions must begin. I see us as the tip of the spear in terms of dealing with climate change. As we gather here today, we face a critical question. Who should lead the charge in climate adaptation and mitigation? So the motion that we'll be debating is, this House believes that while non-state actors play a vital role, climate adaptation and mitigation must be driven by governments. So this motion invites us to examine the roles and responsibilities of different actors in the climate space. Non-state actors, NGOs, businesses, academic institutions, and community organisations have demonstrated agility, innovation, and deep local engagement. They often lead the way in piloting new technologies, mobilising grassroots movements, and holding decision makers accountable. But can these efforts scale without the leadership of governments? Governments have the mandate, the resources, and the regulatory power to drive systemic change. They can set national targets, they can enforce environmental standards, they can coordinate across sectors and borders. Yet they also face political constraints, competing priorities, and varying levels of capacity. We're also in a point where we're thinking about deep uncertainty, and I used to think the deep uncertainty came just from climate change. But we now have the deep uncertainty of the rapid acceleration of AI, and what does that mean? But in the last 12 months, really, a growing awareness that we have deep uncertainty around some of our political decision making. And I think it's had dramatic impacts on people, and a lot of people who come to Stockholm, and I empathise with the situation. And maybe it's a shift and we move to a new normal. So who should take the lead? Is it the state with its ability to mobilise at scale? Or is it the non-state actors with their flexibility and proximity to communities? Or must it be both in a more integrated and collaborative model? Our debaters today will explore these questions from both sides of the motion. They'll challenge assumptions, hopefully, present evidence, and offer perspectives that reflect the complexity of climate governance. And as always, just note, the debate isn't just about winning. You wouldn't think the tension around that table. It's really about learning, engaging, and sparking new ideas. I think there's a good reason why we have two of these and one of these. This is a great opportunity to listen and learn and get different perspectives on the same issues. I think it's really important. We're going to be inviting your views throughout the session, and we'll be using Menti to take a vote at the start and at the end. Be ready to get involved. This is a safe and inclusive space for dialogue. and we encourage respectful listening and lively participation. So Ellie is now going to explain the Menti and audience participation.
Thank you, Mark. All right, so if I just go to more, our QR code for the Menti. If you've been around the conference this week, you should be fairly familiar with this process. We are probably going to do the first vote now, so get those ideas flowing with your own thoughts of what you think. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to do that. The code will also be on the following slide, so if you haven't quite managed to get that QR... Oh gosh, I can see the results already. Drum roll, please.
Don't share. You've got to turn your computer on so no one sees them.
Oh, do we not want to see?
Yeah, we'll show it.
Let's show.
Da, 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 da.
Jeepers. Okay. So sounds like a fairly strong view in the room and online at the moment. We're going to return to this after our wonderful speakers have given us some great ideas and see if we've changed our views at all. So, thanks everyone.
Yeah, so it's just an aside really, but it's very interesting that I went with Sui to COP21 in Paris, and at the subsequent COP, when we'd had a change of presidency in the US, the incumbent president, who's our current president, he sent people to sell coal to the COP. It was quite a strange concept. And at the time we saw this massive reduction in support for climate initiatives around the world, just through that change in presidency. So it's really important with this deep uncertainty around that we acknowledge that and the risks that presents. So let's begin with curiosity, with conviction, and with the understanding that climate action, especially through the lens of water, demands bold leadership, shared responsibility, and urgent collaboration. So I'll just introduce our speakers, but not by their organisations, because I'll do that when each one stands up. But could the motion speakers please stand up? So we've got Benedict, we've got Helen, and we've got Gabrielle. You can sit down now. Thank you very much. Could the against the motion speakers? We've got Kirsten at the far end, Alistair and Angel. Can we have a round of applause for our speakers, please, before we start? Yeah, that's what we call the interactive bit, so we'll do that after everyone's spoken. So to kick us off, for the for team, Ben is Ben Kruger. He's an associate at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, or EBRD as we know it. He leads the development of Green City Action Plans. He conducts climate assessments for infrastructure investments. And he's got a background in environmental engineering, a PhD in wastewater management. He brings a strong technical foundation, systems thinking approach to urban sustainability. And prior to joining EBRD, he worked in environmental consulting. He's focused on water and climate resilience. His work supports cities in transitioning towards low carbon, climate resilient futures. So welcome, Ben. The floor is yours. Ellie will be tracking time. If her book goes up, it's time to stop, even if it's mid-sentence. Okay? But there's no pressure.
So first of all, thanks to all of you for attending the debate today, and thank you to our chairman for introducing the motion. So let me tell you why climate action must be driven by governments. And before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's focus on two little words in that sentence: must drive. Now to us, must drive climate action does not mean who shouts the loudest. It is not about who puts the most money on the table, but for us, driving climate action is about coming up with a new charge. It's a charge to define the rules of the game by which we play. It's a charge to operate at scale, and most importantly, it's a charge to convene and to coordinate. And guess what? These are exactly the spaces that are filled by government. So let's look at these three notions in a little bit more detail. So first of all, consider the rules of the game. Non-state actors play by the rules that are defined by government. And let me actually give you some examples for this based on the work that we do at EBRD, where investment always goes hand in hand with policy work. For example, in water, we're at World Water Week. That's where we, yes, invest in large-scale infrastructure, but we always do this hand in hand with policy work, working with our clients, the governments, on water governance, on tariff reform to recover costs. Or take energy, where we first engage with governments to adjust their regulatory landscape, to adjust their policies, so that then private investors can come in and invest in renewable energy. So that's why governments are going to drive climate action, because they define the rules by which the game is played. Let's consider the second notion, and that is operating at scale. I think we can all agree, sort of based on the urgency of the situation, that change has to be large scale. And who has the mandate to shape national energy systems? Who has the mandate to shape water systems, the mandate to shape transport systems? It's national governments, or even better, it's multinational governments, but I'll leave that part to Helen later on. And these systems are so complex. You mentioned uncertainty just now. It's about resilience, it's about disaster risk reduction, it's about security, that they will always be the responsibility of governments. So even if you privatize infrastructure, state institutions will always be regulating it. So that's why governments are going to drive climate change, because they have the power to operate at scale. And if you allow me to introduce the third notion, and that is arguably the most important notion, and that is the power to convene and the power to coordinate. And on this point, I'd like to reflect what our UN Special Envoy on Water said at the opening ceremony, and I quote, "The we spirit, not the I spirit, should always be the basis." And how do we achieve this? By convening and by coordinating. And this, again, is exactly the role of government. And I'm not just speaking about national governments, I'm speaking about governments at all of the levels. So from our smallest units, the villages, the towns, the cities, municipal governments, all the way to the national level. So that's why governments are going to drive climate action through their convening and coordinating power. So, in summary, and I'm at the risk of repeating myself, but they have the power to drive climate action because they can press the right buttons and they can pull the right levers to affect change. And our societies have just historically grown to afford these powers to government. And we argue that climate action then means that governments are going to remember their own powers and have this new charge to change the rules of the game, to operate at scale, to convene and to coordinate. Or let me put it this way. So if you have a house, it's your house, and it's about to get hit by a flood, what do? Do you tear it down and come up with something completely new, or do you use that little time that you have to fix it, to strengthen it, and to repair it before the flood hits? And I'll stop there because we have many more aspects of the motion 4 from Helen and from Gabriel. And I invite you to listen carefully on how we have defined sort of our interpretation of must drive. It's all about the new charge for governments to be in the driver's seat. So I'll stop there. I think I'm still within time, and I'll hand over to our chairman.
So were you convinced? We'll see. Let's hear some counter arguments. So thank you, Ben. Now we've got Angel Asiam. Angel's the founder and CEO of Equity Future, a Central Africa-based organisation committed to community-led environmental sustainability. She works across Chad, Cameroon, Niger, Nigeria, and the Central African Republic, empowering local communities through green entrepreneurship, cultural heritage reconnection, and nature conservation. Angel's work bridges traditional ecological knowledge with modern conservation strategies, fostering inclusive leadership and multi-stakeholder collaboration. She holds a Master's in Institutional Communication and Marketing from the Soup Management University in Chad and has partnered with governments, NGOs, media and research institutions to drive social and environmental change. So I think she's very qualified to come and speak against the motion. Thank you, Angel.
Well, thank you so much for giving me the stage. Thank you, dear the public. I will not hide that I'm a bit nervous after such brilliant presentation, so the bar is here. But I will just try to speak from my heart and trying to share with you some of the experience we have experienced in my region. When I got this question, the first thing that came in my mind was, would you let someone come to rescue you in your house? What is a connection we actually have with the topic when it comes to environmental? The more as I can see is that we have a disconnection from with this subject. So globally, we have this disconnection based on the tools that is also driven by the society. So it should be the responsibility of the government. But how about people? Is the people living in another planet, or are we all living in the same boat? So I would say the government goes slow. They might have, the mandate to regulate it, but they go slow. And in my context, we can even see that there is less decentralized system that's it's actually empowering more, how can I say this, this disconnection from the global decision to the implementation action we can see in the field. So I think the solution is actually to rethink differently. We have to embrace the concern of climate change, and especially how we treat water, that it's so essential for our living, it's so essential for food security, even our spirituality in some contexts where we still connect with this resource. So for me, it's important to integrate it in our way of being, our way of doing. So the first point in how to do it, it's to do it together. It's to do it together with people. It's not treating the subject as something that is disconnect from the daily life. It's important to bring it to the heart of people. And how to do that, it's only by empowering local people that already have this knowledge of doing, but don't have the tools, don't have the financial resources, and just to bring it together for them to just equip them with the tools so they can improve the management at their local level. So it's what it's first to do. The second thing I can say is also, when we talked about climate change, again in my context, we can see that we don't include mostly women and youth. Maybe it's something cultural, because in Sahel, we culturally talking, we give the respect to the elders. We give the respect to the global system. And based on that, women should not talk. In my country, mostly, I shouldn't be dressing this way. As a woman, you are already put in a box. As a young person, female, you are putting in a double box. But we are, and if you also look at the data, women and young, I mean, maybe it's also because most men, they go to war. It's a bit sad, but we have, in a demography, we have more women and more young people, but that are not included in the process. So how would you address a subject that is completely aligned to the main actor, but that are not actually related to how to find a solution? That's a big problem. So I think it's important today to change this way of doing and actually giving the power to the right people at the right time. And I'm not talking about punctual campaign of climate change day and going on the streets with like, yes, we want our safe. No, but really giving the necessary financial tool, equipping the technical, and also recognize the knowledge on the ground, which is mostly missing. We don't see the importance of integrity, of the diversity of addressing the problem, that it's such diverse. So lastly, sorry. So lastly, I would say it's important to demonstrate. When we want to decentralize a system, it's not often in a context that it's so complex. It's easy to say it's not possible, it can't work. So it's important to have organizations that are also doing this gap of understanding of political level, but also giving the priority to the ground. So the demonstration, it's important, and it's why we need a non-profile organization to play this role. Government cannot do everything. We need a non-profile organization to step into it, to bring this debate into another level. So I thank you all, and I hope you will reconsider your vote, and you should vote for the non-profile organization. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Angel. And I wouldn't underestimate the challenge of undertaking a debate when it's not your first language. So that was fantastic. So and now back for the team, the 4 team. We've got Helen Wanjohi. Helen Njoki Wanjohi Opil is the Climate and Engagement Lead for WR Africa's Cities Programme, where she oversees strategic partnerships, fundraising, and project coordination across the continent. She manages the African Climate Resilient Cities portfolio, including the African Cities Water Adaptation, or AQUA, platform and fund, seconded to the Climate Champions team by the WRI Ross Centre. Helen serves as the Urban Resilience and Water Lead for Africa. With a background in urban planning and climate policy, she's worked with UN Habitat, UNDP, and other agencies on projects addressing informal settlements, urban governance, and climate resilience. Helen's based in Nairobi, where she lives with her husband and 3 children. So, Helen, I'd like you to come up. Thank you.
The microphones are not intended for people my height. So, ladies and gentlemen, today I stand before you to argue that only intergovernmental action, not fragmented action by our amazing non-state actors, can truly turn the tide on the crisis on climate. As we all know, climate change has no borders. Like water, it flows across boundaries, affecting nations indiscriminately. And when governments act or fail to act, the consequences are global. Let me paint a picture. using the so-called Trump effect. Over 150 climate and clean energy contracts worth 1.2 billion USD were halted by the United States, with billions already committed to the Green Climate Fund, the Loss and Damage Fund being cancelled, meaning an estimated 1/10 of the global climate finance, was wiped out overnight. For water, for which we all clearly, care so deeply, which is a global common good and really a powerful enabler of climate solutions, these cuts resulted to an estimated 21 plus unfinished projects in over 16 countries. So look at that footprint. Now, our opponents may argue that this proves that leadership should rest with non-state actors. But here's the truth. When government leadership falters, it doesn't empower non-state actors. Let's use the private sector as an example. It did not empower private sector. It actually discouraged it. So the Trump effect didn't just stall public investment, it weakened the incentive for private sector itself and private finance to align with climate goals. Now let's switch this picture and imagine if that level of power was used for good, positively, multilaterally. That's not a dream, that's a necessity, and that's the charge that we are speaking on today. Global negotiations, which are part of climate and water governance, like COP30, the UN Water Conference, led by governments, are our only hope for neutral arbitration. These platforms, they bring everyone together, all stakeholders, the emitters, the vulnerable, the indifferent, and those on the brink of extinction to one table. And often in this era where it looks like multilateralism is failing, it's always good to lean and remember the shining examples. And I love the Montreal Protocol of 1987. It was a global agreement to phase out ozone-depleting substances. And by 2008, it became the first and only UN treaty ratified by every country on Earth. As a result, 99%, that's really great, of ozone-depleting substances were phased out. The ozone layer is now healing. The hole over the Antarctic is expected to close by 2060, and an estimated 2 million people were saved from skin cancer, as well as a lot of harmful gases that were also warming our climate and responsible for climate change. That is what government-led multilateralism can achieve. So yes, I think as our colleagues have said, local action matters, but governments represent people. They are accountable to citizens and not shareholders. Non-state actors, however well-intentioned, are often driven by their own interests. Could be profit, could be funding, but it could also be control of a narrative that best aligns with their interests. And finally, as Ben introduced, let's talk scale. There are 195 recognized states in the world. How many non-state actors are there? Thousands? Millions? Who speaks for the planet when everyone speaks for themselves? Governments have the mandate, the reach, and the responsibility to act. They are the only actors who are capable of coordinating the large-scale, equitable, and enforceable climate solutions that we seek. So I ask you, in the face of a crisis that transcends borders, will we rely on fragmented voices, or will we empower the only institutions capable of unified global action? Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Are you convinced yet? I can see the pendulum swinging from one way to the other. So now to respond for the against, we've got Kirsten Smith. Kirsten's a civil engineer working with the Arup Energy, Water and Resources team in London, where she contributes to global urban water resilience initiatives, including master planning across Europe, the Middle East and Africa, and utility design for London-based developments. She holds a master's in civil engineering from the University of Edinburgh, where her thesis explored the impact of community engagement on well-being in the built environment. Kirsten brings a thoughtful, people-centred perspective to infrastructure design with a focus on inclusive and sustainable urban systems. So, Kirsten, thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone here at World Water Week. Today, I stand firmly against this motion. While governments undeniably have a role to play in climate action, placing them at the helm of climate adaptation and mitigation is not only impractical, it's counterproductive. Today, I will argue that non-state actors are not just vital, they are often the most effective drivers and leaders of climate solutions, particularly in the realm of water sustainability. They are faster, they are more flexible, and they are more capable of delivering real-world solutions at the pace that this crisis demands, while often being more deeply embedded in the communities that they serve. Firstly, let's start with the obvious. Governments can be slow. Bureaucracy, political cycles, and competing interests often stall progress. Climate change, however, demands urgency and innovation. Non-state actors can act swiftly, pilot new technologies, and scale successful models without waiting for legislation or elections. And it's not just about speed, it's about long-term vision. Unlike governments, which are constrained by short-term political gains, non-state actors can commit to long-term sustainability goals. They are incentivized to think long-term, to reduce risk, and to protect their own supply chains, especially when it comes to water. In addition, climate change doesn't respect national boundaries. Fortunately, non-state actors don't either. Cross-border collaborations between NGOs, universities, and corporations are already delivering results, sharing data, funding, and best practice in ways that governments struggle to ever coordinate. In many regions, trust in government is rapidly declining, while sustainability-first organizations are enjoying greater and greater credibility. These organizations are embedded in their communities, they understand local needs, and they're often more transparent and accountable than state institutions. Secondly, from climate-smart agriculture to water conservation technologies and renewable energy, it is non-state actors who are pushing the boundaries. These innovations are not theoretical. They are already being implemented on the ground, often in places where governments have failed to act. Now, some may argue that businesses are driven by profit and this is a bad thing, but let's be honest, profit can be a powerful motivator for change. When sustainability becomes good business, innovation flourishes. Green building materials, circular economy models, water-efficient technologies, these are market-driven solutions that scale because they work. The UNDP says the industry is the largest user and influencer of fresh water globally, and the private sector is facing a $200 billion risk from water scarcity. This is pushing companies to innovate faster than governments can legislate. Water is one of the most urgent fronts in climate adaptation, and here, non-state actors are already leading the way. Coca-Cola's water replenishment programs have restored billions of litres of water to communities, often exceeding what local governments have achieved. NGOs are pioneering water reuse and recycling technologies, which governments later adopt or regulate, and tech companies are developing AI and IoT tools for real-time water monitoring and climate forecasting, outpacing public sector capabilities. CSOs can understand local issues in a way governments cannot. They empower local and indigenous voices and voices from communities that have not historically had a seat at the table. Non-state actors have the flexibility to bring these voices to the front, while governments are not representing every voice. Let me be clear, I'm not saying governments should step aside. They should. They should enable, they should support, they should regulate. But leadership, that belongs to the agile innovators, the ones who are already delivering results on the ground. To conclude, while governments are important stakeholders, they should not be seen as the primary drivers of climate adaptation and mitigation. Non-state actors are already leading the way with speed, innovation, and impact, especially in the critical area of water sustainability. If we want real progress, we need to empower and elevate these actors, not sideline them in favor of slow-moving state machinery. Thank you.
So has the pendulum swung again? You don't need to vote on Menti yet. We've still got a couple more to consider. So many thanks, Kirsten. Some great points raised there. So to finish off for the 14, we have Gabriel Evans. So Gabriel is a strategic insight and implementation leader dedicated to advancing water, climate and workforce solutions through innovative public-private partnerships. With experience spanning utilities, government and consulting, Gabriel specialises in scaling equitable systems and translating strategy into action. He serves as a board member of the Black Water Professionals Alliance and chairs the AWWA DEI Standards Committee. He's currently pursuing an MBA at Arizona State University, all the best with that. And Gabriel's passionate about building resilient, inclusive infrastructure that centres community needs and drives long-term impact. So Gabriel, would you like to come and share your thoughts, please?
All right, thank you all. I heard this today or yesterday when I first got here, but you write it water, you read it democracy. This was the rallying cry of the Italian people during the 2011 water referendum. A simple truth: when the common is threatened, the people rise to defend them. And when we ask the one body that is supposed to speak for all, not some, to act, and that's the government. This debate is not about whether NGOs matter, because of course they do. It's not about whether private innovation is helpful, because it is. This is about who is responsible when the rain falls, when the fire comes, and when the grounds crack beneath us. It is about who must be charged with our trust and held to account when lives, livelihoods, and generations are on the line. So why must government drive climate adaptation and mitigation? Because only government are designed and can be redesigned to represent everyone. Not an individual mission, not a donor priority, not a market segment, if and when it's profitable, but everyone. With governments, we already have scale, we have opportunity for coordination, we have the infrastructure, and we have the multilateral potential of government. Unlike non-state actors whose missions are often narrow by design, governments must be expansive. They must be structurally obligated to hear every voice, to weigh every impact, and to reach every corner of society. Governments aren't just makers of policy, they're the keepers of the commons. Their mandate must not be limited to direction. They must listen, they must convene, and they must steward. Change doesn't come from isolated actions. It comes from systems that are built on each other, where governments can create the grounds for communities to stand, act, and scale. The frameworks governments can set, the recognition they can give, the accountability we will charge them to uphold, makes every other actor's work possible. Yes, not every government is perfect. Some are broken, some are slow, and some have failed their people. But if we abandon government, we don't just abandon bureaucracy or our house. We abandon the only space where every person, rich or poor, coastal or inland, here today or at home, should have a voice. And that's what this debate is really about, voice. Climate change is not just a planetary crisis, it's a crisis of life, a test of who's heard when the world is burning beneath our feet, when the rivers are drying and the trees are dying. Non-state actors can do incredible things, but they don't speak for everyone. They can't be voted out, they aren't required to listen, and they don't have to stay when the headlines fade. Government must, and that's the difference. And that's why, even in times of a major dysfunction, we must reform, rebuild, and reclaim the government, not retreat from it. So let me end by bringing this home. When the next flood comes, when the fire rises and the dust continues to fill the sky, and when our children or neighbor asked, "What did you do?" will we say we outsourced our future to the market? Will we say that we only stood on the goodwill and passion of some and hope that their great pilot projects would be enough? Or will we say we stepped forward, we gave government their new mandate, not just to rule, but to convene, not just to manage, but to represent, not just to react, but to lead with and for all of us? Because the truth is, this is our climate, this is our water, these are our voices, and this is our moment. So if not, when? If not now, when? Yesterday has left us, and tomorrow has already came. So if not our voices together, then whose? So vote for the motion. While NGOs and markets matter, government can drive and lead climate adaptation and mitigation, because only they will be charged to answer to all of us. Thank you.
So that was that's our last of our 4 speakers. Well done. I thought that was very inspirational. And finally, so for our last speaker for the againsters, and we have Alistair Chisholm. Alistair Chisholm's Director of Policy at CIWEM, Chartered Institute of Water and Environmental Management, where he leads the organisation's engagement with policymakers, environmental managers, and the public. He specialises in integrated water management, climate adaptation and sustainable drainage systems, or SUDS, and he's a vocal advocate for nature-based solutions. Alistair spearheaded a Freshwater Future manifesto and has played a key role in shaping CIWEM's input into the UK government's Independent Water Commission. His work connects technical expertise with policy innovation to support resilient water systems and informed decision-making. So, Alistair, please come up and share your thoughts.
Thanks very much, Mark. Okay, so the motion, obviously, suggests that whilst non-state actors are important, climate adaptation and mitigation has to be driven by government. Must. Benedict, must. I want to challenge that, finally, as the final speaker, not because government isn't essential, but because if we rely on it as the primary driver, history suggests we will fail. Why? Because climate change is a multi-generational challenge and governments operate on 4 to 5 year time horizons typically, increasingly driven by post-truth, populist sentiment, and above all else, desperate to cling on to power longer than a single term, which is increasingly not seen. I'm going to speak in the UK context as that's where I'm from and I have direct experience of. I also think it's helpful because we in the UK were and possibly just about still are seen as leaders on the global stage when it comes to driving climate action. Much of my example relates to the UK's Climate Change Act 2008. This is rightly celebrated as a piece of legislation. It introduced legally binding carbon budgets, which have given us a clear mitigation pathway and driven progress on net zero. Though undoubtedly meeting those budgets is getting harder and harder. But generally speaking, that is a success story for government. But look at adaptation, the other half of the Act. The adaptation reporting power and successive national adaptation programmes were meant to deliver a coherent cross-government resilience strategy. They haven't. The Climate Change Committee, that's the UK government's statutory advisor, their 2025 progress report is stark. Adaptation delivery is too slow, in some areas stalled, in other areas heading in completely the wrong direction. Not a single adaptation outcome scored good in its ratings. That's after 3 whole 5-year national adaptation programme cycles. So if government-led adaptation was going to work, we'd be seeing it by now, and we're not. And pulling back to that UK context again, what we're possibly seeing is a regression on previous levels of policy commitment, with a real tension now between sacrosanct government imperatives and missions around economic growth and housing delivery and standards for longer-term climate resilience. Those are not marrying up. So here's the alternative: non-state actors as the real drivers, with government setting the framework. Why? Because non-state actors can think and act beyond political cycles, very simply. They can commit to 20, 30, 50-year strategies without the churn of elections. Foundations like the Grantham Foundation, the Quadrature Climate Foundation are investing billions in long-term climate research, mitigation and adaptation. They are not waiting for the next government spending review. Universities, Oxford Net Zero, the new UKRI-backed Managing Adaptation to Climate Change Hub, they're building the science and data platforms that will underpin decisions for decades. Charities like the National Trust are already adapting our coastline, rolling back infrastructure and restoring natural buffers because they can plan on half-century horizons, whereas the government's plans for coastal change get ignored. NGOs like the RSPB are restoring peatlands, locking up carbon, reducing flood risk, improving biodiversity because they can work across catchments and decades. And let's not forget business. Corporate coalitions like RE100 and the Science Based Target Initiative are reshaping markets. TCFD and now the IFRS drive transparency on climate financial risk reporting. These aren't token gestures. They're binding companies into multi-year decarbonisation pathways that survive leadership changes. Now, some have said only government has the mandate and scale. Yes, absolutely. They set the rules, they convene the right actors, and they provide legitimacy to a degree. But the evidence shows that when it comes to delivery, especially on adaptation, government alone can't keep pace. And this was the point Kirsten made. How many discussions do we now have about the need for nature markets to boost investment in climate and environmental outcomes? Others will argue that markets are short-term. True for some, but not for all. Endowed foundations, universities, mission-driven NGOs are explicitly long-term. And even in the corporate world, long-duration power purchase agreements and things like the SBTI commitments lock in change. So the model I would suggest is government as the enabler, set clear objectives, embed climate risk in regulation and provide the data and standards. It's lagging way behind on those kind of things, but let the non-state actors who can outlast the parliaments drive the delivery, because resilience and decarbonisation are marathons, not sprints. And if we keep waiting for the perfect cross-government plan, we will lose the race. And I'll leave you with this, right? We are all non-state actors, all of us in this room, in this conference. Governments have already failed us, so we have no choice but to lead them. Thank you.
Just really quickly, on the Menti, there's a space for putting questions and comments. So I'm just telling you that now, that while there might be some further discussion to come, please do feel free to be putting your own questions and comments there, because we'll come to you for that later. Thank you.
And it also means that we can capture that in a feedback note following the session, which I think will be really good. So now we've got a short session for rebuttal. So each team has put forward their ideas, they've put forward their views, and I would want to emphasise they've polarised their views for the benefit of the debate. So just so we're clear, so afterwards you don't go and take them to one side and chastise them, which it's been great for the debate and really appreciate it. But in terms of rebuttal, I think, Ben, you're going to come back on the for team. And I think, Angel, you're going to come back for the against team. So maybe we'll have Ben first.
How much time do I get?
5, 4? Let's say a concise rebuttal, all right, of a few minutes. Okay? Let's have a round of applause. Build it up.
Thank you, Chairman. And also thank you for our opponents in the debate. Great points raised there. I would like to pick up on 2 points that came up. Of course, a lot of them very valid, and I'd struggle to come up against them because it's not one or the other, but the question is who's in the driver's seat. The first one that came up, Kirsten, you mentioned corporations thinking long term, and Alistair, you mentioned governments only thinking in 4 to 5 year cycles. But if we look at the tragedy of the commons, and I think climate change is one of those, and we look to the private sector, then I want to re-emphasize what Gabriel said, which is that do we want to put our future in the hands of markets? Because realistically, the big private corporations with the highest profit margins in oil and gas, and in cash crops and monoculture, in mining, I'd struggle to understand how they are thinking long term for us. And that's where governments come in and can regulate them. And I hear your point, which leads me to the second part, that governments think in 4 to 5 year cycles, but we already have a mechanism to address this inherent flaw in the system, and that is national governments coming together as part of multilateralism. And that's where governments start holding each other account amongst each other. So they're not just held account by the populace within that 4 to 5 year cycle, but they're held to account by other countries. And that's exactly the point that Helen made, for example, on the Montreal Treaty. We already have a mechanism that sort of lifts government out of thinking about that 4 to 5 year cycle. So, sort of in summary, those 2 points. On the one hand, that I strongly doubt the question whether especially private actors who have a lot of money are those who are thinking long term. Yes, there are very commendable initiatives around water stewardship and around alliances for sort of sustainability in the private sector. But I mean, I don't have to go into the details of greenwashing and what we're seeing in that space to know that I wouldn't want to rely on them to be in the driver's seat. And then the other notion that we already have a mechanism for governments to think outside of that 4 to 5 year cycle. And I'll pause there.
So I'll now ask for Angel to come back on the rebuttal for the against. We're okay for time, Ellie? Thank you. And prepare yourselves so that, because we're going to be having the voting after Angel's rebuttal. After we've gone to the floor and had a few questions. Okay? Thank you. Super.
Okay, me again after hearing all this. Well, one thing that it's certain is that, yes, it's important to have government to regulate. But one thing that is also certain is that we don't see government action on the ground. In the Sahel context, where I come from, what we see the most is people struggling to find a solution among themselves, where the government is supposed to regulate and have the lead on it. It's not the case. So the way the climate change it's addressed, it's always something that is left behind. We have only, but this is more globally, only 3% of financial is going to environmental issue. This is not me saying, it's McKinsey. How would you consider that people are suffering on the ground? People are really living in this daily, but they don't have any support. So they have to find solutions. So the question is not, is it important to have government involved? Yes, it is. But at which level? The actual action on the ground, I think it should be driving by people and should be driving by non-profit organization. Ellen said something. The government, yes, it's engaged globally. Now we have set global strategic development goals. But we come here, I remember I was at Stockholm World Water Week the first time in 2017, and we were already talking about the emergency. So I feel like after coming back, I don't know, 5 years later, it's the same. We all talked. We all seems to be in an urgent. But who is responsible if we don't co-construct with people on the ground? Who is taking the lead of it? Where the action actually comes. So I think this way of thinking, of approaching the environmental topic without consideration of social economic aspect and social cultural aspect, it's a wrong way of doing. We have to go and adapt to what already exists on the ground. What is the knowledge? And I think Kirsten mentioned it perfectly. Non-organization can go very fast with no interest and no regard on whether there would be an election or not. It's more about priority. What is the priority on the ground? So I will stick in my position in the emergency of the action. I think it should be coming from the two sides, where maybe, and I haven't heard this from the fore, where the government can actually play a key role. It's actually integrating the concept of climate change adaptation into the National Development Strategy Plan, which is not the case. We address it as something left behind. Why don't we construct our national development system with this understanding? So yes, I will stop here. I thank you all for your listening, and I hope you will reconsider your vote. Thank you.
So Ali, do you want to, I think if you've got a microphone from there, maybe you'll be able to direct some of the questions to maybe each of the teams. And as a team, you've just got to agree with yourselves who's going to respond. Is that okay? Everyone's clear.
I'm going to start with one from Mentimeter, and I'll give everyone time if they do want to raise their hand and ask their question in the room as well, so start forming that. But here's a question for the fore team, and it can go to anyone, so feel free to decide. Governments had the power and the mandate, so why hadn't they taken preventative action until now?
I've got a feeling that the against team have been sending you questions on the Menti.
Yes, please.
Come on. Let's, yeah.
So tough question. Oh, okay. Now it works. I think that question, as we said, has definitely been sent by that team. But when we say that they haven't, we gave you examples of success. We also gave you the challenge of what happens when there's fragmentation. So we made the case of both, that there has been success. I don't think we can say there has been absolutely no success. When we look at what the climate change and adaptation and mitigation discourse was like, 2 decades ago, really it was misunderstood. We've come a long way. And even when that discourse began, national governments, particularly from the areas that often people say are underrepresented, from Africa, from Latin America, from the small island states, they have pushed successfully to ensure that people have understood elements such as loss and damage, what that means for communities such as that. Before, the climate change discourse was very heavy on mitigation, didn't consider adaptation as much, so we have moved the needle. It may move slowly, but it has meaningfully moved. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to second that point, and I would go as far as saying it's It's sort of a gross underestimation of saying that governments haven't done anything. Yes, I fully agree that the scale is not as large as the climate crisis calls for, but I invite you to just go around this very event and go to the various events where organizations like the GCF or the GEF, that are a result of multilateralism, governments coming together for climate action, are achieving real results. We're fully on your side that it's not to the speed and the scale that we need, but to say that they haven't done anything doesn't do it justice.
Fantastic. Do we have any questions from in the room? Oh, one here. And you may ask it to a team or to anyone.
Now, we can't just have questions on so we've got to try and get them balanced across, if we can do that.
Nice.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you. I have actually 2 questions for each team. Is that okay?
Could you try and cut that to 1 question for each? Because we'd like to give everybody an opportunity to speak, and we've got quite time. So
Okay,
one question for each.
Okay, sure. So I think it should be for the governments, and considering the neoliberal climate governance and free markets, how would you see your role balancing the solutions? Because some policymakers or scholars do talk about marketizing climate solutions, which is actually leading to climate capitalism that comes from the innovation without taking into account the voices on ground or from ground.
We've got a mic winging its way over just because. So there's a mic coming now. Yeah, good idea.
Okay, hi. So I'm from the United States, right? Obviously, we got a lot going on. My background, my first master's in sociology in Crim, and I always found it interesting of the belief that there's a difference between private and public. When what we've seen in the past year, there's a close relationship of private and public that's always intertwining. And so when we think about our stand, when we're driving forward, is creating these new mandates and saying, this is what we expect of you, this is how we're going to hold you accountable, and making those agreements across nations, across levels of government. So I work with a lot of GMs, utility managers, who are working with the private and forming these cross-sector relationships. And so, but it is because of the GMs, the utilities, who are based in place that can move these things forward, downstream effects from within a state, like the state of Georgia, right? And then how it affects to their neighboring states, right? And so it's very important to think and understand that policy is lived, right? It's not just a piece of paper. And so making sure that those are closely aligned. Okay,
and you had another question. You said you had 2 for each. Have you got 1 for 4? 1 for Amin. Okay.
Hi. So my question is for the 4 team.
It would help if you passed the microphone across. Oh yeah.
So I like to think we got into this predicament because of governments. If the governments did their work, we shouldn't be here today. So why should governments still be the ones to drive this when they've clearly failed? What is it going to take us to get to a place where government can think of these things as an emergency? So if they failed us all this while, why should they be the ones to drive it now?
So I'll turn the question back to you. Do you feel that, non-state actors have succeeded? We're in this predicament. For instance, when we talk about emissions, right? Where do they come from? While we say government is responsible, they are led by the private sector in those countries. So I feel that everyone is responsible for where we are, and the focus is who should take us out, who should take the charge, and that's what we're pushing for today, that it's government.
Okay, so the emissions are done by the private sector, but that's maybe because the governments are not putting stringent expectations from these private sectors. So it still goes back to them because maybe the government still wants more taxes and all of that. So
Thank you. Should we give someone else an opportunity?
Any question for the against team?
Is that a question for the against team at the end? Yeah. Okay, let's try that. I think this is the against team's opportunity to speak.
Thank you very much. My question was actually for the for, but maybe I should throw one to the against team. So over the years, we've seen that non-state actors in this case have also been victims of what we question the government when we look at accountability, when we look at structures, and we still see this today, which is one of the arguments of, for the Trump effect, if we call it that way, that the resources have not been used the right way. So how do you think that with more confidence, in these non-state actors, we can move the needle? And if I can just throw one quick question to the FOR team, the government team, if we do rely on government and continue relying on government, we'll continue to see this disparity where some governments are very forthright about how they approach these issues, while other governments just feel like, well, this is not priority for us and we can look away. And we continue to see this imbalance despite the fact that it's a global problem. So how do you respond to the fact that some governments will take action, other governments will just look away and we still have the problem?
So let's take the FOR question first. So do you want to give
perfect.
a concise?
So I would argue you're totally right. I mean, the private sector is also responsible for emissions, but I think a lot of that has come from lack of action from the government, and the private sector has to some extent been waiting for something to happen, and recently there's been a bit of a step change in that. I think it's got to the point where private sectors have realised that governments aren't going to drive climate action anymore, and they need to be the ones doing it. So kind of to go back to kind of what I was arguing, climate resilience has now become a profitable thing for companies. They're seeing their supply chains be affected day to day. I've got a fact written down here. According to JP Morgan, every $1 invested in climate adaptation yields $2 to $43 in returns. So it's becoming good business. And so non-state actors now have the motivation and the mandate to take climate action. And so they've been let down by governments too, and so we shouldn't be relying on them.
And very concise.
Sort of immediate response to that exact figure, every dollar invested, 2 to 40, is exactly the same figure we've heard about 20 years in the sanitation sector. And have we seen the level of investment we need? I'm not sure. So it's kind of that reasoning that we've heard from the private sector that we get if we purely rely on the private sector. On that other question, why the disparity between governments not putting it onto their agenda, I would argue that we're in the weirdly fortunate position that governments who don't put it onto their agenda have to sort of reconcile a very contradictory situation. Take the US as an example that is struggling with increased extreme weather events. So they are in a position where they have to argue sort of for climate adaptation while doing nothing on climate mitigation. So sort of right now, climate change, it's doing its thing to put governments who are not putting it onto the agenda into a very awkward position if they continue to hold onto that position.
So we're going to take one more question, and I think because we've had quite on the for motion. Have we got a question for the against motion, please? In the front here, thank you. This will be our last question. What we're then going to do, just so we're clear, we're then going to vote on the Menti, and then we're going to give our teams an opportunity, a bit like the rebuttal, just to maybe have a few reflection. So you want to think about the reflection that might come after we've got to the vote, okay? I think we could do that individual if we can pass the mic round, but just think about the one takeaway, if you like, something like that. I know we're making the rules up as we go along, but we're adapting. Okay.
To adapt, to give a kind of equal question to the against team as one of the ones earlier. There was a recent report saying that it's only 57 companies since 2016 that have been responsible for 80% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So now, especially considering the disinformation campaigns that we've seen coming from companies that have driven reliance on fossil fuels and made it more difficult to then exchange to renewable energy and other climate mitigation and adaptation points. I just wanted to ask you to respond to this, especially since the 4 team has had many pointed questions similar.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so on my point that I think we're all non-state actors, unless there's a massive disagreement with that principle, where do you think the pressure on governments to regulate those small number of really damaging companies is ever going to come from, if it's not from citizens as non-state actors? Governments, not only have they failed to act quickly enough on the mitigation and adaptation fronts, they've also actively subsidized those really damaging activities. They've given those kind of corporations massive tax breaks in order to encourage them to, invest in those companies. We are the most important non-state actors in this. I mean, this team have talked about non-state actors being big corporates and no one else. There's no other non-state actors. We all are.
Okay, and on that point, there will be no more questions. I'm sorry, but you've had the opportunity. I'd just first of all like to thank the fantastic presentations from our panel, and thank you for your questions. I think they've been really valuable. Your chance now is to vote on Menti. Now, I think I was right with the original numbers. It was something like 3 out of 18. Was it 4? Oh, 4 out of 18. Oh, it moved. 4 out of 18. My percentage just went up. That's a challenge. Would you all like to vote on Menti now, please? %22.2%. 22.2% worth. Is it working? Is it working? Well, we're getting some through. It's working on some. Should we give everyone a little bit more time just to make sure you're getting the vote in? But it does look like there's been a shift. Do you want to put the first barcode? I think it's really important that we're taking the time. That it's not mad rush and we've got to do it. Let's get the. Is that the barcode that works? Try that one. If you're. Now, is anyone having trouble? Otherwise, has everyone voted? Hands up if you haven't voted. Or, I don't mean if you haven't voted. If you've had any troubles voting and you want to vote. Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Remotely, Alistair's got his wife, his kids, his cousins. Okay. So, Ellie, could you give us... So I think, if I'm right, we were on 15 and 4, which was 77.8%, and 22.2%. Never try and do numbers in front of people, you'll embarrass yourself. Where have we moved to? 18 and 14. All right, let's just see. Even I can. Yeah, you can almost hear the clunk. Wow. Wow. So I think it's about just over 56% are for and about 44% are against. Okay, we're not going to deal with the percentages now, okay? What we're going to say, so the 4 have won they've won the debate, but I think we should say before we give out our rapturous applause that the against have dramatically shifted the room in terms of getting support, which I think is a really powerful thing. And I can't help sense thinking that if we think about the idea of common purpose, it's about us all working together, something like that. So I'd like you to think about your reflections. But could we have a round of applause for our... Stand up. Yeah. And I'd like to use... We're all winners, okay? So we're all winners here. So maybe some reflections, and we'll start with the losers first. Maybe Angel, would you like to pass the mic down and just sort of one liner? What's your reflection?
On against or for?
On the experience and the debate.
Oh, on the experience. First of all, this is my first experience. As you have noticed, I'm nervous. I was nervous to come on the stage. But I'm very happy to see such inclusion and diversity. Because when I was coming to the Stockholm Water Week, I wasn't meant to be here. And I guess it was based on my profile and the work we do with community on the ground in the Sahel that I have been selected. So yes, it's a privilege to see that Stockholm World Water Week is also moving into something. And I was at the opening ceremony and I saw I was there when Taylor's...
Taylor, yeah.
Yes, of course. So it's what I just want to say is that, yes, it's a win because the more we will go for inclusivity, the more we will understand that climate change adaptation, it's not about one person or one system. It's all about us, like my friend here said, us. So yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Thank you for having been kind with us. I can see that some of you switched to against. So thank you for that. Thank you.
Okay, Alistair.
Thanks. Yeah. So I mean, I have to say when I was invited to take part, I was on the for side in my heart. Because of kind of the area I work in, in so many ways it's a no-brainer that government should be stepping up. And it's kind of with a heavy heart that I've actually talked myself round through almost doing this exercise, that I just think from a pragmatic point of view, we all really do have to step up and be the leaders that so many people in this conference are demonstrating that they already are. Because if we don't make the case, I don't think governments will do it on their own. Governments generally follow, they don't lead. And I think that's something that we have to remember.
Thank you. And Kirsten?
Yeah, thanks. Great to be here. I think we're all going to share a pretty similar opinion here, where really what all of us want to see is governments and non-state actors working together to drive climate action. The governments hold such an important role, and I mean, I was also quite intimidated to argue against that, but kind of the more research I did, the more I saw how non-state actors really do have a voice in this space and an ability to influence in this space. And so, yeah, I think what we want in an ideal world, what all of us want to see is governments driving climate action. And it's just not necessarily happening yet. And so we need to think, what are we going to do to make sure that happens? So I think, yes, governments should be driving climate action, but whether or not they are is the question there.
Thank you. Ben?
Yes, thank you first of all again for the invitation. My main reflection is a point that you made, Angel. Of course, I was only thinking about it from a for perspective going into this, but based on the assumption that governments reproduce the underlying power dynamics, and you spoke about being a woman and being young, means that you're double boxed into a scenario where you don't have a voice in the existing power structure, and if that is then perpetuated to the government level, then we have a problem if we're fully relying on governments to drive this. So that's one of my main takeaways.
Thanks, Ben. And Helen.
Yes, I think it's also been interesting for me because I wished I had been put on the other side when I got invited for the debate. So I also really struggled to think about what to say, to support a pure government approach. So forgive us for the hard stance. But I think for me, again, similar to her, the more I thought about it is for understanding that non-state actors, they are vital collaborators, but they cannot take away or replace that leadership role of government, because while local communities understand their challenges, they do not have the power to convene and advocate at the scale that the crisis requires. While private sector, is agile, fast, and everything, there's nothing really to protect us from when they opt maybe to prioritize profits over people. So I think at the end of the day, I still hold my stance, which I did not have when invited to the debate, that, the state is the one that, is our best shot at having equity, long-term vision, and the change we require. Thanks.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, I think it's a both and. If the Justice League, right, is a bunch of people, the Avengers, right? It's a bunch of people with different specialties, and combined together, they form a team and they drive change, right? DEI was attacked because it's such a powerful perspective. It's a strategy, right? You diversify. We're lacking this person at the table. We need this skill. We need this expertise. If you think the way a company is ran, the C-suite is made of a bunch of people with different expertise, right? And so when we think about attacking this multilateral problem, we need multilateral thinking, right? The strong point for the government is the infrastructure is there, right? Wherever you walk, there is something there. And it's finding and matching those non-state actors, those partners, and with the same goal, the same motivation, the same outcome, while respecting our own individual wants and desires, right? I think the belief of DEI, the misconception is we all have to agree, and that's not true. We all have different things that we are here for, but we're all trying to get to the same place. So,
thanks, Gabriel. So I just thought maybe I'd share a couple of things. First of all, I hope Stockholm Water Week has given you an opportunity, stating you out of the box, and given you and other people an opportunity to have a voice and to engage, because I think that's really, it's part of what I think I love about Stockholm. Can non-state actors influence things? I came to Stockholm knowing nobody. I literally arrived with one guy who'd invited me along, John Matthews, fantastic guy, inspirational. We ended up going to the COP, running the only large-scale public engagement around adaptation, when adaptation didn't feature in mitigation, nor did water. And I think then we went to COP26 in Glasgow, where we had our first water pavilion, where we now have our Water for Climate pavilion. And I now think of Ellie, who's now one of the climate champions, who's going to be there really trying to influence the process. So I think private actors have a role to play in influencing government. I think we all would accept that we're not doing enough in government. And the reason we talk a lot more about adaptation and resilience is really because we've been failing on the mitigation, and the impacts and the extremes are becoming more extreme and more frequent. But I definitely think that the way we're going to get through this is through real, genuine common purpose and collective action. And I hope that Stockholm and Syria as a catalyst for that are really at the heart of bringing that together. So thank you all for your time. It's been a great debate. Really interesting to recognise that people, if you don't walk in somebody else's shoes, you don't understand their perspective on the issues. And I think the more that we listen to everybody else's different perspectives before we jump in and conclude, I think it becomes really powerful. And this is one of those places in the world where we can really come together, listen and learn. So thanks very much. I love this event and really appreciate your time in supporting it. And thanks to the team for all your support on making it happen. Thank you.